My name is Andrew Lichterman. I'm Program Director for the Western States Legal Foundation, which is based in Oakland, California. Western States Legal Foundation has, since the early 1980s, provided information, legal assistance, and analysis of nuclear weapons programs for peace and environmental activists. And the nuclear weapons laboratories, in particular the laboratories at Livermore, California, Los Alamos in New Mexico, and the Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and in Livermore, California, have been involved since the very beginning in the programs generally referred to as Star Wars, the various efforts by the U.S. military establishment to develop some set of weapons to be able to destroy ballistic missiles. Usually, in the last couple of years, when people are talking about Star Wars, most of the attention has been focused on the effort to deploy a relatively limited number of non-nuclear interceptor missiles in Alaska. The famous hitting a bullet with a bullet approach, in which they're trying to deploy kinetic kill missiles that are supposed to destroy incoming nuclear missiles on impact. That's really just a very small part of a much broader set of ballistic missile defense programs that includes this element of what's called national missile defense, the effort to defend the continental United States against incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles. There are, however, other technologies which are being explored even for national missile defense. Perhaps the best known example of this is the space-based laser, a program that was de-emphasized somewhat under the Clinton administration, but still was receiving considerable funding for ongoing research and development. In addition, you have a wide range of theater missile defense programs, and these are really important programs that have not received nearly enough discussion. And there are a number of different reasons why these programs are important. First of all, the technologies which are being explored for so-called theater missile defense, efforts to shoot down shorter range ballistic missiles, primarily to defend U.S. troops deployed in expeditionary forces around the world, also purportedly to defend our allies in various regions should that become necessary. These technologies really are often very, very difficult to distinguish from national missile defense capabilities. For example, technologies which can be used to shoot down missiles in their boost phase placed near some other country could also conceivably shoot down longer range missiles. And in addition, you have this wide range of technologies. Again, you have various types of missile systems. You have the airborne laser program, which is a program to put a very large chemical laser in a modified 747 in order to be able to shoot down missiles in their boost phase. You have a whole set of modified terminal phase. That means when the missiles are finally coming in programs, a modification of the old Patriot system, which worked so poorly in the Gulf War. You have a range of these other programs which also are intended to protect U.S. expeditionary forces in the field. And that's a very important part of this whole picture that's often ignored, that a major, major intention of this set of ballistic missile defense programs is to maintain the U.S. ability to put its troops all over the world and to take military action. One of the parts of the ballistic missile defense programs, one of its characteristics, one of the characteristics of the ballistic missile defense programs that receives far too little attention is that the basic technology development that is being done even for this much discussed national missile defense plan with the kinetic kill ground-based interceptors. Even that program entails a wide range of technology development and, if it is deployed, of actual deployment in space of systems that have a wide range of other applications. One of the main things they're going to have to do if they try to put any national missile defense system in place is to place a new and far more sophisticated set of sensors of various kinds in space. Satellites to find targets on the Earth's surface over the Earth's surface, pinpoint them, be able to figure out where launches occurred, this type of thing. This range of sensing systems and the kind of technology development that you have to do has a wide range of applications for other missile defense systems. For example, if they did proceed with a space-based laser, it too would need a broad array of sensing systems. They can also be used as part of arrays of systems for ground attack, for being able to lead conventional weapon systems, high technology conventional weapon systems, to fixed or moving targets, various places on the ground. So all of this technology development contributes to the continued and increasing use of space for military purposes. Now, the use of space for military purposes really has been going on for decades. All of the major adversaries in the Cold War used space for surveillance of their adversaries and so on. But the United States really, because of its tremendous advantage in technology, because its tremendous economic advantage, particularly over Russia at this point, has been really proceeding far more rapidly than any other nation on Earth in continuing to explore more and more extensive and sophisticated uses of space for military purposes. And the second piece of this is an increasing push. Now, it's really at this point principally a set of research initiatives, a wide range of technology development, and a really quite strong political push by elements in the military and elements among the military contractors. There is a strong push towards placing various kinds of weapon systems in space. Again, probably the most visible of these is the space-based laser. And this isn't something that's going to be up there in 5 years or 10 years, possibly even in 20 years if these forces are successful in pushing this through. But when you think about the tremendous political power of these institutions, when you think about the very, very long timescales that these high technology development programs have today, if you don't want this type of thing to happen, you have to stop it before it gets momentum. Because once it gets momentum, once it has a contractor constituency, once those contractors have made contributions to the relevant members of Congress and members of particular committees, it may well be too late to stop this kind of program. Once again, what you have is this push towards the militarization of space and towards placing weapons in space. And the ones that tend to attract attention because they sort of conjure up precisely the Star Wars image, zapping things with lasers from space. Just as the national missile defense interceptors have dominated the conventional national debate, even the more extended debate about the militarization of space tends to focus on just a few systems. But what you really have is a very, very broad program of technology development that provides the basic infrastructure for doing all kinds of things in space. Reducing the cost of launch, making it possible to launch heavy payloads into space much more cheaply, much more frequently, much more quickly, exploring the kind of light, strong structures that you need to persist in space, exploring sources of power that can provide energy for weapon systems or for any other kind of systems in space. All of these are a kind of common infrastructure that is being developed across a wide range of different government agencies, some of it in the military, some of it in the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, some of it in private contractor initiatives with the prospect of getting larger contracts sometime on down the line. And this activity is increasingly coordinated. This is why you now have space commands in each of the major services. This is why you now have a U.S. Space Command that coordinates all their activities. This is why you now have a national security space architect who is responsible for coordinating the activities of the various space programs in the military services, the so-called civilian program in the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the activities of the contractors who are pursuing these private research initiatives in the hope of getting contracts if all of this comes to fruition 10 or 20 years down the line. And all of this poses a really major danger, which is proceeding kind of under the radar of most people who look at national security policy in the United States. And it has not escaped the notice of the people who fear that these systems may be aimed at them someday. This is why you find Russia and China, for example, pushing the concept of some kind of an extended outer space treaty that would ban the further weaponization of outer space. A few examples of the types of things that are being contemplated, aside from the space-based laser. There are a range of so-called directed energy weapons which are being explored, of which lasers are only one. And this is one of the prime areas where you find a large overlap between the research activities for space-based weapons and the kind of research activities that have been going on for a long time in the Department of Energy nuclear weapons labs. Many of the facilities which the Department of Energy claims are necessary for merely maintaining our existing stockpile of nuclear weapons. These are so-called pulsed power facilities, and what they do is they take a whole lot of energy, focus it in a very small space, released in a very short period of time, instrument this, study it very carefully, feed all of the data into increasingly sophisticated supercomputers, and do various kinds of simulations. One of the uses of these types of facilities, other than simulating nuclear weapons phenomena, is precisely simulating the kind of phenomena you need to understand if you are going to develop a range of sophisticated directed energy weapons. And again, we are not talking about necessarily Buck Rogers kind of stuff, death rays and so forth. Principally, we're talking about weapons whose main purpose is to either impair the operation of complicated electronics or destroy complicated electronics, basically fry their circuits, right? And so this is the type of weapons that are being looked at, again, not necessarily 5 or 10 or 15 years from now, but this is the kind of thing that Space Command and these other space-oriented parts of the military services have on their wish list for 20 or 25 years out, primarily to be able to, for example, temporarily or permanently impair the operation of other nations' systems in space, for example, satellites. Theater missile defense is simply another set of missile defense systems that are being advertised as having shorter range and being intended only for use in a limited area. So they're not a big national umbrella, which is, of course, the claim for the National Missile Defense System. All of the services are getting their little piece of this. So you have the Navy having systems which are based on ships. You have the Army and the Air Force having various systems which can be anything from ground-based lasers to, again, a laser based on an aircraft. And one of the things that you have to think about is all of these systems are designed to work together. So when the military thinks about theater missile defense, if you look at one of their long-range planning documents and look at their diagrams, they are also thinking about theater missile defense, about shooting down missiles, together with very, very ambitious programs to destroy the missiles before they ever get off the ground. And all of this is part of a much broader effort, generally referred to as counterproliferation, which is pretty much the new rationale which has replaced the Cold War for, any kind of high technology spending that the military wants. They're saying, well, we need all of these things to counter the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, biological and nuclear weapons, and their use on ballistic missiles around the world. So what you're getting is a tremendous range of military research and development on everything from increasingly stealthy, long-range, and precise conventional weapons, on missiles of various kinds, cruise missiles, also aboard aircraft, designed to destroy the facilities where various kinds of weapons of mass destruction are built, stored, or deployed, to destroy missile launchers, to find these missile launchers, going back to these space-based sensing systems again, that's where those come into play. And then, should they be launched, first to shoot them down in their boost phase, using either shorter range missiles, although that's unlikely. You'll be able to do it with that. In most cases, this is where they're looking at, for example, laser applications, the airborne laser. And then for what they hope are the few missiles that survive, various missile technologies, modifications of the Patriot and so forth, to shoot the missiles on their inbound trajectory. And again, one of the reasons why this is so important, why this theater missile defense is so important, is that one of its primary purposes is to enable the United States to continue to deploy its military forces around the world. One of the largest worries of the U.S. military is that one of these expeditionary forces will be hit by some kind of a weapon that can cause a large number of casualties. And given the fact that they have not done a terribly persuasive job of justifying these frequent military interventions around the world to the American people in any event, they are afraid of taking casualties. And much of this theater missile defense effort and much of this counterproliferation effort is really aimed at sustaining the political ability of the United States vis-a-vis its own population to deploy these expeditionary forces around the world. Well, you probably can't come up with any single cause for why the United States has maintained this just astoundingly large military establishment. I tend to think of it as kind of vectors all pushing in a particular direction. So, of course, you still have the tremendous political power of the military contractors who make billions and billions of dollars every year from research, from the development of the weapon systems, and from the manufacture of those weapon systems, which finally are approved one way or the other. And of course, they still contribute enormous amounts of money to members of Congress and to people who run for president and so forth. So that always remains a major kind of institutional factor. And within the military, you still have this general story about why it is legitimate for military forces to be deployed all over the world and the need to protect these forces. And if they're going to political decision makers who simply have a very limited capacity to say no, their endless spinning of worst-case contingencies also tends to push towards more and more sophisticated weapons development. But of course, the most important thing is that the United States has committed itself for many, many decades to being able to place its forces virtually anywhere in the world to protect so-called American interests. And what those American interests tend to be are the preservation of access to markets and access to resources at privileged rates of one sort or another. And so once again, if you look at what kinds of contingency planning is going on and what kind of wargaming you see, an awful lot of it is focused, for example, at the Middle East and at protecting, in particular, our access to oil in the Middle East. So it's no one of these things, but they all push in the same general direction. And where you get is this enormous military juggernaut that continues to develop new technologies, that continues to spend many, many times as much money on weapons as any combination of foreseeable adversaries. The persuasive technical arguments against the possibility of a successful national ballistic missile defense system, the possibility of putting up some kind of, as Ronald Reagan used to like to say, I believe he referred to like an umbrella over the United States to protect us against nuclear attack. There are ample technical arguments about why any country that is sophisticated enough to have an extensive long-range nuclear weapons program, like, for example, Russia, will have the ability to either overwhelm this system or evade it through one form of deception or another. And one of the things that you have to realize is that the first response to limited deployments is going to be retention of significant numbers of nuclear weapons in order to overwhelm such systems and so on. I mean, ironically, the United States in their negotiations with Russia last spring over the proposed by the United States modification to the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, they were saying as much to the Russians. They were saying, look, you will always have adequate numbers of nuclear warheads under any conceivable future arms control treaty to overwhelm the limited ballistic missile defense system that we are planning to put in place. And so one of the things that these initial steps tends to do is to encourage other countries that fear that they might be the target of the U.S. military to either retain large numbers of nuclear weapons or possibly to increase the number of nuclear weapons that they have. There are also good technical arguments going back to the inception of the ballistic missile defense program that any country that has the sophistication to have an extensive long-range nuclear ballistic missile program has the capability to really either deceive or evade most of the ballistic missile technologies, if not all of the ballistic missile technologies that are being proposed, one way or the other. It's simply easier to overwhelm defense with offense. However, it's important to note that pretty much exactly the same technical arguments that are being made today were being made 30 years ago, and they were just as persuasive then, and the programs are still alive and well and getting billions of dollars 30 years later. And we have to ask ourselves, why is this true? And again, it's a combination of factors. Part of it is kind of ideology run wild. The notion of a ballistic missile defense system is very appealing in the climate of fear stoked by a half century of a nuclear arms race. And it appeals to an American public who have been taught by decades and decades of public relations by arms makers to look for technical solutions to political problems. You have this problem of nuclear confrontation. You have this problem of broad high technology militarization of the planet. Let's see if we can just find yet more technology to trump the problem that really was caused by high technology militarization to begin with. And so the problem rolls on with ever more sophisticated offensive weapons and the quest for some kind of a pie in the sky or a set of satellites in the sky defensive system. And it's the formula for an endless arms race, because it all occurs on the kind of terrain where the experts and the military contractors have control of all of the information and control of most of the means of disseminating it. And really, the only effective way to challenge these programs is to go to the root of what are they for? What are they protecting? And this is, again, why it's so important to focus to some degree on the theater missile defense programs. Because while the national ballistic missile defense programs are driven, largely by kind of contradictory claims that are never really closely examined, I think that they really have more, the people who are designing these systems have more of a belief that the theater ballistic missile defense systems can work for some of the purposes they're designing them for, because they are in many instances intended to be used to protect U.S. troops in the field against far less sophisticated adversaries, smaller numbers of missiles, not nearly as sophisticated systems. And once again, it's in a context of warfare where they're figuring they're going to go in and possibly take out a lot of the missile systems first and have a relatively small number to deal with later. And so to a certain extent, the broad-ranging technology development that the justifications of ballistic missile defense are designed to support, we're protecting you here at home in the continental United States against attack with horrible weapons of mass destruction. Part of that is used as a stalking horse for this set of technologies which are envisioned as continuing the capability of the United States to be dominant everywhere around the world on the ground. Globalization is a new term, but it's not a new phenomenon. And the use of the United States military to support the interests of the most powerful players in the United States economy in their activities around the world, either gaining access to markets or gaining access to resources and labor at low prices with cooperative regimes who will keep a wide range of conditions for business favorable from the perspective of business. This goes back, again, many decades. So neither globalization nor the use of U.S. military force to protect it are new phenomena. And really, this is just a continuation of something that's been going on for a very long time. However, the consciousness of the use of U.S. military forces for these purposes is a newer phenomenon. And really, when you look at the great sensitivity that the United States government has to taking casualties when it's putting its troops in the field and the tremendous resources they want to invest in protecting them as a consequence, to a certain degree, that is a development that arises out of a growing consciousness in the United States that, the interests that are being protected may not truly be the interests of all Americans when we are protecting those forces all around the world. To a certain degree, I feel like being hopeless is, in a strange way, an expression of arrogance. If you live in the United States, you are really subjected to the most sustained and sophisticated propaganda of any population anywhere on Earth. In some ways, in terms of understanding how the world works and understanding what's possible, living in the United States is like being down in the bottom of a deep hole. And in an odd way, this is where my optimism comes from. We work in our work on nuclear weapons abolition with amazing people from all over the world. And outside the United States, there is very little uncertainty that U.S. nuclear weapons programs and the continued development of more sophisticated uses for nuclear weapons, that the wide range of high technology conventional weapons programs and this push towards the weaponization of space, there is little doubt in most of the rest of the world that all of this is a bad idea, and there is growing united opposition to it. So I both have confidence that there are people elsewhere who can see ways to solutions that I can't see, and I also have faith that people inside the United States and outside will unite over the years into some kind of a real international movement which will really work not only against these particular developments, but towards a way of resolving conflicts internationally that does not continually rely on military force, that is multilateral, and that really makes this entire focus of U.S. policy, this tendency to try to find military technical solutions to every political problem, a thing of the last century.